Welcome to the channel, guys. Frank Macaluso here, talking about the 325xi. This is an E46, and today we've got some vibrations at low speed, high RPM, high acceleration. What could be causing those vibrations? That looks like it's coming from the middle of the chassis, and it feels like it's rumbling God's green earth every time, and it's very specific, and it's very repeatable. Well, I'm talking about the center bearing on the drive shaft. Now, to help demonstrate what a bad center bearing actually feels like in your car, I'll go for a quick drive. Now, most BMWs have a two-piece drive shaft. You have your front half of the drive shaft connecting to the transmission, and the back half of the drive shaft that's connected to the differential. And right in the middle, in between those two, is your center support bearing. It has a bearing with a rubber membrane that then connects to an outer metal shield that then gets hooked up to the chassis. And the problem is that that rubber membrane over time wears away. When that rubber membrane fails, that center part of the drive shaft is moving inside of the housing, the outer housing of that center support. So what happens is when you're accelerating, typically at low speeds with high torque, first, second gear, when you're kind of flooring it, you feel the vibration. And you can kind of work your way through it if you accelerate slower or don't go up a hill where you're not providing a lot of torque. But in this case, I wanted to demonstrate you can feel it almost consistently whenever you want. And in this case, what you find is that there's a rumble coming from the center of the car, right there. Once I hit second gear, 30 miles an hour, it kind of goes away. It's not nearly as prominent. So the point is, that center bearing definitely needs to get looked at. Okay. So let's get the car in the garage. Let's get it on the lift, start taking things out, and let's just see how bad that rubber membrane on that center bearing really is. That's right, this is the center bearing, right? And we need to remove the entire drive shaft in order to access that. Now, like I said earlier, this right here is the bearing itself, right? But the bearing is in a rubber encapsulated housing that isolates it from the outer rim of the bearing, and then that actually, as you can see with the two slotted holes, mounts to the chassis. So let's start tearing down the bottom of this car. Let's start getting rid of that exhaust and everything else in a quick time lapse and access that drive shaft and see just how much play is in that old center bearing. And there it is. This is the center bearing, and you can see here, this moves quite a bit. In fact, you can probably see my finger, hello, behind it. Yeah. This thing is shot and needs to be replaced. When we take the drive shaft down, I'll have a better shot for you. But yeah, we need to remove this, separate the two halves, and replace that. So it appears that this U-joint here is actually kind of fused to the differential input, and that's because there's like there's a centering hub on the U-joint that fits right into the centering hub on the differential for centering purposes, and it is really kind of fused, and there's no way that I can break it through. In fact, I got a little bit by hitting it on the side with the hammer, but I need to remove this guy and then use a chisel to get inside of there. So this guy has to come out by two 10mm bolts, and then there's a subframe bolt and a couple of other 13mm. the entire drive shaft out. Before we separate the halves and start working on removing the center bearing, I gotta mark exactly where the splines need to match up, because this is balanced from the manufacturer, right? This is balanced from BMW. So if you remove it and then install it in a different orientation, the balance weights are gonna offset each other, and you're probably gonna end up getting vibrations. So it's really good to mark exactly, that's just the nut, but the top, such that when you put the halves back together, you're aligning the marks. Now that we got the rear half of the drive shaft, which has the center bearing attached, on the operating table, as they say, we can see how bad this center bearing actually was, and the rubber grommeting that failed. So to remove it, you need to use external lock ring pliers, and you can see the two little holes there. You gotta expand that ring, pull it back, and then you use a chisel to get on the inner race of the bearing and push it out. That's simple as that. Now, before we remove this, you always want to note the installation orientation, because it can go either this way or it can go that way. But in this case, you can see that the big ring, the big inner ring here, faces toward the spline, and in this case, that face is in the same direction, not this way, right? You can see the difference, right? Right? Right. Now you just want to use a little bit of grease all around the outside here. Confirm you have the right orientation. And then you use a pipe. So I do enough of these center bearings to know that you need a center bearing tool, which is essentially a 1 1/4 inch thin walled tubing or pipe. And basically you slip it over the edge and you start pounding on it with a 5-pound hammer with just about enough momentum to get what you want. A couple smacks. Not far enough. More smacks. I think it's good, but let me just give it one more good one. Good. Now we take our lock ring pliers, expand it, push it in, and make sure it locks in place. Now you can see how important it was to mark your alignment holes, because there's no other way to clock this. However, when you get it on, figure out exactly which spline you need to line it up, and you are good to go. So in doing this, make sure that the drive shaft is completely compressed. You want to have a kind of hold into there, and you want to slide it into the flex disc first, and then you want to slide it onto the two holes. Once you have that, get your two 13 millimeters, just get them in by hand, you know, just a little bit. Little how's your father, you know? Now we have our 4 M10 by 1.5s on the differential end. They get torqued to 67 Newton meters. 67 Newton meters. Make sure you align everything. You'll see score marks on the differential as to the orientation that was installed in before. Just try to repeat that if you can. And that's 4. Get cover back in place. These also need to be torqued. For now, I need to raise the differential up just enough so that these other bolts can mate into their holes as well. Now, as it stands right now, I have these just loosened enough to move along its track. And in order to preload the bearing, you need to push the whole outer assembly forward just a tiny bit, and then you tighten them down. So I'm going to push it forward a tiny bit, and I'm going to use the gun to tighten it down, and then we'll torque it down to 20 Newton meters. Do one side first, other side second. Now we torque. And finally, at the flex disc, we want to align the drive shaft input with the flex disc, put our bolts on, and then torque these M12 by 1.75. These are 10.9, so these guys get torqued down to 110 Newton meters. Look at that, huh? Way better. This thing's gonna drive like a dream. Now that everything's all wrapped up, let's bring the car down and go for a drive. A very much anticipated drive, I might add. All right, our maiden voyage. This is somewhat much anticipated only because I have been dealing with this for a few years, and I guess I've just been too lazy to go and actually fix it since it wasn't getting worse. But I really wanted to see and finally just deal with it, because I gotta be honest with you, it was getting really annoying. And once your wife starts complaining about it, you do something about it. So let's start off with an uphill shot. Oh yeah. Oh, it's so nice to drive now. It's so comfortable. Feels like a BMW again. All right, let's do another really quick run here. I'm going uphill. I'm gonna be giving it a little bit of gas, a little bit more torque than normal. I'm gonna rev it up to about 5,000 RPM to see if I can feel any vibration like I used to. Nothing, nothing. Smooth as a baby's bottom. Spicy. BMW quality, like it should be. Silky smooth. Now that's how you do it. 1 repair down, 10 to go. I don't even know what that means. And that does it for me, guys. I am out of here. Later.